Hey everybody, Sayre at Nova Motorcycles again. This week we're talking cylinders. Single cylinder, twin cylinder, triples, four cylinders. A lot of you are going to know exactly what I'm talking about, but a lot of people don't know what that means. People hear the term V-twin and they're like, oh yeah, sure. No idea what it means. So we're going to start off with the simplest of all engine designs, the single cylinder. This Norton International, we did some piece on it a little while back. Cool single overhead cam, 1951 Norton International. It's a 500cc single, and that just means it has one piston, one conrod that connects to the crankshaft, and it just makes a boom and then exhausts its stroke, exhausts the gases, and then comes around, takes in one, and goes again. They're called thumpers typically, colloquially, because when they're running, they go thump, 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 exactly like that. They're very simple. The first engines, even on cars and stuff, were single cylinders, and they got to be more complicated as time went on. But they've lasted. Modern dirt bikes are still single cylinders because they're lightweight, and they make really good torque. They make one big power pulse. It's really easy to control, and they're really kind of fun to ride because they're satisfying with that torque. But soon after the single came the twin cylinder. That is exactly what it sounds like. Two cylinders, two pistons side by side, two conrods connected to the same crankshaft. This here is a Honda Superhawk, a 305, a pretty famous example of one. Honda's first real, quote, real motorcycle. This is a bike that kind of started the death knell for Triumph and BSA and Norton because this little 305 could go as fast as a Triumph 500, and it had an electric start, and it didn't leak oil. And the electrics worked. So this was the beginning of the end for Triumph. But this is basically two cylinders side by side in parallel, and this is called a parallel twin. The design that's still in use today, the modern Triumphs are using it as well because they were also known for their parallel twins. The benefit of a twin cylinder versus a single cylinder is it's a lot smoother, it's balanced better, it doesn't vibrate as much, and the pistons are lighter individually, so they can actually rev faster, rev higher, make more power. And then the other benefit is generally speaking, and the nerds are going to get mad at this one, but generally speaking, more cylinders makes more power because you have more valve area available. More valve area you have, the more fluid got fluid in the form of fuel and air you can pull in, burn, combust, and evacuate, and that makes more power. So big cylinders, big valves, you can flow a lot at certain rates, but they start to trip over themselves, and they don't make good power all over the place. So the more cylinders you get, the more valves you can put in. BMW, very famous for another version of a twin cylinder motorcycle. This is called the horizontally opposed twin, aka a boxer, and it's called the boxer because the pistons literally go at each other. They go away from each other, they come back to each other, away from each other, come back to each other. It's a very well balanced motorcycle because of that. There's no forces to counteract each other. They don't vibrate a lot. They're very smooth. The cylinders stick way out into the airstream, and they cool off very well. BMW riders who ride in the cold always talk about how nice and warm they make your legs because you're sitting right behind that cooling fin. And they're pretty good. Some people think they look a little funny. People who race them run into problems of clearing ground clearance with the engine, and there's all sorts of methods to jack that up a little bit. But when you start doing that, your center of gravity gets weird. So they have their limitations, but all in all, they're very reliable and interesting design, and taken from aircraft design, which is kind of cool. BMW, their logo is actually known to be it's a propeller because they made aircraft motors way back in the day. This design kind of stemmed from that, so it's kind of got a cool history. It's kind of neat. Moving on into the real multi-cylinder world is the triple. Now, Triumph came out with this bike in 1968. It was their foray into the superbike world, their first one, and actually one of the first superbikes, really. It basically took a 500cc Triumph and grafted a third cylinder onto it. So it worked really well, and it didn't work very well at all. And basically, they had all the problems that the Triumphs had up to that point. They leaked oil. They weren't reliable compared to the Japanese stuff. They had horrible electrics, all the stuff we've heard about Triumphs. This bike had, but it also went like stink. This thing was one of the fastest bikes when it was made. And had they got it to market sooner, it probably would have done a lot to help save the British bike industry. But as it stood, this bike came out 6 months before the Honda CB750 came out, which is a 4-cylinder bike that didn't leak oil, had electric start, the electrics worked, and was faster. So it didn't last very long. They're loved and they're really nice bikes to ride, but they don't compare performance-wise to the next generation. So it's really kind of a holdover from the previous generation of 50s technology. But it's a 3-cylinder, as we can see by the pipes, and many say that that is the best of both worlds. You have an amount of torque that happens because it's 3 instead of 4 cylinders. There's still, each piston is relatively decent size, so you're making decent power with each pulse of the piston movement. But it also is small enough, and the pistons are small enough that it can rev up and make high horsepower. You have the valve area of the multi-cylinder in effect. So 3-cylinder bikes are really kind of cool. They're gems in their own right. And there's been a couple companies that have ventured into them. They don't catch on quite as much because they're just kind of, let most people view them as unnecessary, I would say. And they don't make the kind of peak horsepowers as our next version, which is the 4-cylinder bike. The beginning of what I would say is the true superbike era is the inline 4. Became to be known as the universal Japanese motorcycle because every single Japanese manufacturer made one that were, arguably indistinguishable from each other as far as engine characteristics went. They were big bore, inline, 4-cylinder, air-cooled motors. But they did what the other bikes couldn't, the other British bikes and the American bikes couldn't. They made power. They did it reliably. They didn't leak. They didn't vibrate. And they stayed together and went. So these bikes really transformed the industry, and they have the peak horsepower you can make out of a 4-cylinder bike is really unlike anything else because they're flowing so much fluid at high RPM through the valve area that it's just you can't do that on the twins. You have to make it up on the twins and the singles and the triples with torque and other rideability and things. Without getting deep into the weeds, because you can go on all day about this stuff, and there are 5-cylinder bikes, and there are 6-cylinder bikes, and there are 8-cylinder bikes. The general characteristics of riding these things is that the 4-cylinders don't have the same kind of torque as the twins or the singles. Harleys are a great example of a very torquey bike, put out a ton of torque, and their peak horsepower is about the same as a 305 Honda. There's not a lot of peak horsepower. They run at their RPMs pretty quick, but they pull like a tractor when they pull. Whereas some of the later, the super bikes, something like this, when you get on the 650 Honda here, you crack the throttle and it's like, well, what's happening? Nothing's going on. And then the revs have to climb up and hit, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 RPM, and suddenly it gets very exciting and you get this wall of power that comes on. And it's just a very different thing to ride. So they all have their benefits. I personally have a single, I have a twin, I've had a triple, I have a 4. I like them all. And it's just kind of like what you're feeling like and what you want to do and, what you're into, as they say. So that's about some basics in a nutshell. You can really get into the details of engine design, really going into it, and that's a little bit much for a little YouTube video. But yeah, comment on this. Let us know your favorite bikes. Do you like? Some people just love triples. They've always had them. I think they're super cool. I wish more companies made them. Some people love singles. I'm a convert to the single world, and I love them. And I'm building myself a single-cylinder race bike, which we'll talk about coming up. Some people just swear by a 4 and don't want anything else. So let us know what you like. And as usual, please like and subscribe.